Okay, so let's talk about Renoir. It's a 2012 French film about the artist, his son, and a woman that has a relationship with both of them. So we're Washington, D.C. history and culture, and we do these film history programs. And really the purpose of these programs is fourfold. Number one is we want to watch great films or see great films, including ones either we haven't seen before or haven't seen in a long time. And I think this one falls into that category for most of you. We also want to study history and popular culture through films. So in other words, how can we use film to learn about history and culture? Number three, we want to learn about the historical context of the film, its creators, and the subjects portrayed. And then last but not least, discover an additional historical resources like other films or music, books, museums, etc., etc. So that's the purpose of these programs. Before we begin, I'm curious to know, have any of you been on one of the other Renoir programs that we've done? So if you're a speaker, it's always helpful to know a little bit about your audience. So I'll leave the poll question up for just a little bit and then I'll share the results. Basically, I'm asking because I don't want to be repeating stuff that I talked about in the other presentation. So I'll leave this open for just a second and let all of you respond, and then I'll share the results and then we'll get on with things. Okay, I think we have a good enough participation. So, well, this is flattering. 68% of you have gone on one of the other Renoir programs that we have. So thank you very much for that. For the 32% of you that have not been, welcome and thanks for joining us. So again, just an opportunity to learn about Renoir. Let me close this poll out. I'm going to step away from my computer for just a second. Okay, so I closed the poll out in Zoom. If it for some reason still popping up on your computer, you can either minimize it or drag it down to the bottom of the screen. So Renoir is a 2012 French film based on the last years of Impressionist painter Pierre-Auguste Renoir in the south of France during World War I. The film tells the story of Andrée, who was the last model of Renoir, and the first actress in the films of his son, the film director Jean Renoir. Andrée was the link between two famous and widely acclaimed artists, a father and son. While the father is at the end of his brilliant career, the son is searching for himself. His great career as one of the most celebrated movie directors having not yet begun. So there's kind of an overview of the film. So what I'm gonna do is, if you haven't been on one of these programs before, I'll basically give you an overview and kind of some contextual information about Renoir and the film so that when you watch it, you'll kind of know what to look for and what to expect. If you just want to sit on this part of the presentation and watch the film later on, I've emailed out the link that has it. You can do so. Or if you want to watch it with us, when I get done talking, maybe in like 30 minutes or so, I'll actually stream the film. Okay, let's talk about Renoir's life and career. So this film, as the description I just read, relates to his later years. It's set in 1915, and Renoir was an older man by that point in time. But prior to that, he had been a very acclaimed artist. So Renoir, early on in his career, was basically a starving artist, but over time, his career takes off, and he was very financially successful in the middle and later years of his life. However, he starts out early on in his career. He's a painter in a porcelain factory. This is the example of a work he would have made. So if you can imagine a ceramics factory where they make porcelain by hand and the designs on it have to be painted by hand. That's what Renoir was doing as a teenager. Now, eventually that job is eliminated because they develop machines that can do that. And there's actually an interesting quote that Renoir has in the film where he talks about that. So there's this one point in time where he's having dinner with his son and he says, quote, "Look at me. I started as a porcelain painter before the appearance of machines decided my fate. If they'd continue hand painting porcelain, I would have spent my whole life painting plates." And so he's basically talking about how sometimes fate intervenes and sends your life on a different trajectory, so to speak. So you can be on the lookout for that scene in the film. He says that when him and his son are having dinner together one evening. And let's talk about Renoir, just his early career. So this is a portrait made by a friend of his. And these are some of the iconic paintings that he made throughout his life. So you've no doubt seen some of these before, although you might not recognize them as Renoir. In my opinion, the most important quote in the whole film, the one that kind of summarizes Renoir's career or his basically philosophy on art, or kind of gives you the essence of his vision for art, is this one, where he says, quote, "A painting should be something pleasant and cheerful. There are enough disagreeable things in life. I don't need to create more," end quote. And so the reason why I think that's such an important quote is it really talks about, the vision or the essence of what Renoir is trying to accomplish as an artist. And when you look at his paintings, you can really get a sense of that. And in these art programs, I always talk about how if you know just a little bit about art and artists and history, you can see something new and just kind of make an educated guess as to maybe who painted it or when they would have painted during what point in time in their career, or what was going on in the world. And that's certainly true for Renoir. So I mean, look at some of these paintings that he made. They're people out in public places and having leisurely type activity. You don't see death and destruction or any sad things. Men and women interacting with one another in a romantic type of endeavor, young, beautiful ladies, people at the theater and the opera, beautiful clothes. Renoir's mother and father both had clothing, seamstress, and tailor background, so he grew up becoming familiar with clothing and fashions and styles, much more so than I would say the average man of his generation. And people interacting with one another. So if you think of some other artists, this is a self-portrait that he made of himself. You think of some other artists and they're depicting death and destruction and unhappy thoughts, not with Renoir. So if you were to see a painting that you didn't know who the artist was, and if you see stuff like this, you'll be able to make an educated guess, like, oh, that might be a Renoir. This is perhaps one of his most well-known paintings. These are dancing couples and whatnot out in public in Paris. These are some people eating lunch. Here's another one of his most well-known paintings. This is Luncheon of the Boating Party at the Phillips Collection in Washington, D.C. Again, you just really can, when you look at the paintings that he made in this kind of chronological order, you can really see kind of the characteristics of the subjects, and then also the beautiful colors, another thing that he's known for. This is called Two Sisters. This painting's at the Art Institute of Chicago. And then he did this set of 3 paintings of couples dancing. Just FYI, that's not Vincent van Gogh on the right. People always ask that whenever I show this painting. Just another guy that just happens to look like Vincent van Gogh. And so there you go. So these paintings aren't shown in the movie because they're, again, it's focused on the later years of this, but just wanted you to get kind of a sense of the type of artwork that he made in his career. And I'm guessing that many of you have either seen a lot of those paintings, or perhaps even if you've seen all of them before, so kudos to you. And what happens is Renoir, for the most part during his professional life, he's kind of based in Paris, although later on in life, he starts suffering a severe case of arthritis. And Renoir never liked cold weather to begin with. So in the late 1800s, he moves to the south of France on the Mediterranean coast. And then in 1907, purchases a house. And this is what he looked like back then. This is a self-portrait he made of that era. Renoir is pretty widely known, although not as well known as, say, Van Gogh. I would be curious to know if I walked around, say, a art museum and showed this picture to 100 people, random people, how many of them would know that it's Renoir? How many would recognize him, even though he's a well-known artist? Not quite as recognizable as, say, Van Gogh or Frida Kahlo or maybe Georgia O'Keeffe. The home that he was living in the south of France is now a museum that you can visit. So next time you're in the south of France, make sure you go check this out. There's the TripAdvisor rating for it. You can see it's very highly rated. And here's where it's located at. Hold on for just one second. Okay. So anyway, he had been based for the most part in Paris. He was living in different places, but being a professional artist during the mid and late 1800s, it made sense to be spending a significant amount of time in Paris. But eventually, in the late 1800s, he moves to the south of France. He rents houses before he ends up buying this one. And here's a little bit closer view of where it's at. You can see if you look down to the bottom left of the map, there's Cannes. And then if you look up towards the top right, you can see Nice and Monaco. It's temporarily closed just because of the COVID situation. And here's the entrance. And then this is just some information that talks about the site itself. So they actually have original paintings here and sculptures and whatnot. So a great place to go check out. This is the view. Notice, depending on the size of your screen, if you look off in the distance, you can see the Mediterranean, that light blue color. Kind of remember this picture because I'm going to talk about it in just a second. And it's known for having these beautifully landscaped grounds. So this is where the film is set. Again, the film takes place in 1915. This is Renoir, where he's living. This is his home. Again, at this point in time, he was very successful, even though he was initially on a starving artist. That definitely was not the case later in life. I don't know what his net worth was exactly at this point in time. He's not a multi-millionaire by any means, but he's doing fairly well. He has a staff of people that are there able to help him in his older age. He's living in this nice home. Then when you go there, you can actually go on the inside of the house. And again, this is where the film is set. Renoir's house in the south of France. Now, in the film, there's a lot of content, basically, or a lot of the film is devoted to the physical ailments that Renoir was facing at this point in time. And that's true. He actually had a lot of health issues later in life, particularly rheumatoid arthritis, and a very severe case of it at that. He had a hard time painting later in life, which was very painful for him to do so. And so when you see that kind of keep popping up in the film, that's not a Hollywood type of addition. That's actually the case. He actually was in a lot of pain and had a lot of physical struggles later on in life. There's a photo of him in his wheelchair. So he pretty much toward the end of his life lost the mobility of his legs. He couldn't really stand or walk all that well. And he had to either basically get around in a wheelchair or have people help him. But that's actually a photo of him. Here is another one a little bit later in life. So he would basically just wheel himself or have someone push him up to his easel, and then he would make his paintings. And so again, you'll see that frequently in the film. And this is the museum's display of his studio with the wheelchair. And his easel and his palette. That's his palette that's in next to the chair, kind of to the left of the chair, if you were sitting in the chair. And then that's his box of paints over on the right. So he was in such dire straits. Sometimes he frequently had to have people basically help him mix his paints or do some of the kind of manual labor part of the painting process for him. And he talks about that in the film. There's a quote that I like where basically they're asking him, why do you continue painting even though you're in all this pain? Why not just basically relax and whatnot? And he says, quote, "The arthritis pain passes, but beauty remains. I'll carry on painting until I collapse." So you can be on the lookout for that quote when he's being questioned as to why he overcoming all these physical challenges to continue painting. It's really admirable. I think a lot of people would have just basically given up and stopped the art making process, but he continues doing so up until he dies. So the film is set at Renoir's home. However, it was not filmed there, partially because it's basically a museum that's open to the public. So people can go through on any given day and look at all this stuff. I'll just scroll back through these slides. So even though the film is set at Renoir's house, that's not where it's filmed, just because they thought it would be too much of a hassle to try and do that while it was open to the public and tourists and stuff traipsing through here. But I'll tell you where it was filmed in just a second. Let me Scroll back through these slides. So anyway, if you get a chance, make sure you visit the south of France and check out Renoir's home. There's another home that he lived in that's in kind of north central France that he lived at earlier. You might want to visit, but this is where they actually filmed it. So there's a big, I don't know what you would call it in kind of American terms or English terms, but kind of like a big park or a nature reserve or like a botanical garden. This is actually where they filmed it. Now, it makes sense that they would film it here because it's pretty much just down the street from Renoir's house. So it's not like it was filmed in some completely different geographical area. It's just a short drive from Renoir's home to this, but this is a botanical garden, kind of nature reserve, whatnot. And you can see this is another place you might want to go check out if you're visiting there. And here's a scene from the film. Now, this scene just happened to capture my own attention just because if you remember back when I was showing you the photo, the view from Renoir's house, and you can see the Mediterranean, but it's not quite this close. So the first time I saw the Renoir film and I saw this, and he's pretty close to the water, I was like, you know, Renoir's got a beautiful view from his home, don't get me wrong, but he wasn't quite this close, but they basically were filming it from a structure at the garden. A lot of people, when they go here, are just really focused on the water aspect of this area. You can see it bakes up to the Mediterranean. I mean, hey, that's pretty nice. Mediterranean beachfront property. But in the film, they're not really focused as much on the water. They're kind of focused more on Renoir painting out in nature. And it does have beautiful grounds you can go walk around and check out. I noticed it just seems like most people really kind of focus on the water. When people, if you Google this name of this site, in fact, let me go back just so you can get the name of it. If you Google the name of this, 90% plus of the photos are of the Mediterranean, not as much like the gardens and the grounds and stuff, which, you know, it's fine. Everyone likes the water, but the landscaping and whatnot is pretty beautiful. And so when you see scenes like this, these are where these were filmed. They're basically kind of implying that he's at his home or he's close by, but that's not the case. He's actually at this botanical garden, and that's a scene from the film. This was a still shot. Let's talk about Mrs. Renoir. She plays kind of a minor role in the film. Aline was his wife, and they met in 1880 back in Paris and were married 10 years later. And this is a painting of her. Now, again, initially, they kind of met through mutual friends, and she starts out modeling for Renoir, and over time, they end up in a romantic relationship. And then 10 years after they met, they ended up getting married. So you can see she married Renoir in 1890. She dies in 1915, the year the film is set. So she's passed away before the film actually starts, but she knew Renoir for 10 years before they were married. This is a famous painting of her. And so she was a frequent model of his. And there's numerous artworks that he did that include her in them. I'm not going to show you a lot of them just because, again, her role in the film is kind of minor, and the film is focused more on his life after she passes away. This is the family tree. And you can see they had 3 children, Pierre, Jean, and Claude. And all 3 of them ended up being very successful. All 3 of Renoir and Aline's children ended up being involved in some type of artistic endeavor. And the film focuses on Renoir's relationship with his middle son, Jean. Sometimes people in American context might call him Jean, but John. And then, of course, there's 2 other sons that play. They're in the film as well, but they don't play as big of parts. And here are the 3 sons in the film. So Pierre, on the left, is the oldest son. He was injured during the war. He doesn't really have a big role. You kind of see him towards the end. Claude, over on the right, I don't know what other word to use. He has kind of like a creepy role. He seems like a really weird kid, but that should be just my opinion. You can, I guess what I'm trying to say is if I was Claude, I don't know if I'd be happy as how I was presented in this film. And then, of course, the main character is Renoir's middle son, Jean. And during the film, when it takes place in 1915, the sons were 30, 21, and 14. Although Claude, in his role, I don't know, to me, he seems like that character seems a little bit younger than 14, but I could be mistaken. Maybe I don't have kids, so maybe some of you that are more familiar with kids can decide for yourself. But anyway, this is how old his three sons actually were in 1915, and the picture of the actors that play them in the film. So you can be on the lookout for them. And this is Renoir's wife later in life, and he talks about they basically talk about the children talk about their parents' relationship, but Renoir, in my opinion, he seemed very grateful to have this partner in his life. His wife, he gave her a lot of credit for basically different things that he had accomplished and whatnot. And he talks about that a little bit in the film. So you can be on the lookout for that. But eventually she passes away in 1915. Even though she was 18 years younger than him, she died before he did. And leaves him a widower. This is another self-portrait that he made. And again, at this point in time, he's getting up there in years. He was born in 1841. So when his wife passed away, he would have been 74 years old. And that's the age he is in the film. Now, another character that's in the film that is mentioned quite a bit, although you don't really see her too much, is Gabrielle, or sometimes people call her Gabriella. She is, you frequently hear her name mentioned in the film. And if you didn't know about Renoir's life or career, you might not know kind of the context of what her situation is. So basically, she starts out, she was a relative, a kind of a distant relative of Renoir's wife. And they hire her to be a nanny. And over time, she ends up becoming really close to the family. And Renoir ends up doing a lot of paintings that include her in them. It's almost, again, like she's part of the family. So this is a famous painting that Renoir did that's at the Barnes in Philadelphia. That's his wife that's kind of in the top kind of left of the photo with two sons and then a neighboring girl over on the far right. But that's Gabriella in the bottom right corner. And so he thinks highly enough of her to include her in this family portrait that he ends up making. And then this is her with Jean. He is the kind of one of the three leading actors in the film. So this is Renoir painting his son and Gabrielle when his son was very young. And they have a very close relationship. And so you frequently see him talking about her in the film. She basically helped raise him. She was almost like a surrogate parent to a certain degree. And eventually she ends up kind of, I don't know how to say it, exiting stage left, so to speak, in terms of the Renoir household. And Jean is really upset about that because he was so close to her. And the kind of the exact circumstances of the relationship she had with Renoir is subject to debate. Eventually, she ends up posing for him. Here is a portrait of that. There's dozens and dozens of paintings that he made that either have her by herself or included with other figures, including some nudes. Renoir frequently did nudes throughout his career and whatnot. But again, her and Jean, Renoir's second son, have a very close relationship for the rest of their lives. This is a picture of them in much later in life. And again, this very, very close, almost like a sister or like I said, like a surrogate parent, so to speak. So when you see or when you hear them in the film talk about Gabrielle, which they do frequently, I don't know the exact number of times that she comes up, but it's a lot. That's the story. She was this distant relative of Renoir's wife. She starts out being a nanny. She comes very close to the family. Eventually she starts posing for Renoir, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the story behind that. So let's talk about the film itself. And then again, we'll cue it up. We'll live stream it in just a little bit. A little bit more context. This movie is really, the ratings for kind of individuals is really all over the map. So if you go to Amazon, you can see that a lot of people really, really like this film. 60% gave it 5 stars. 19% gave it 4 stars, et cetera, et cetera. If you look over on the right, another website that I like is Internet Movie Database. And I don't always agree with their reviews, but basically IMDb, people go and rate films kind of like how people rate restaurants on Yelp. And I don't always agree with the consensus of the IMDb folks, and sometimes I do. I just was really surprised that their audience gave this film such a low rating. So again, interesting to see that the Amazon people loved this film and the IMDb people not so much. And when you've seen it, if you haven't seen it already, I'll let you decide for yourself what you think. And again, it's depicting Renoir later in life. This is a self-portrait that he made of him at that point in time. And here's the actor portraying him. Now, one of the, I noticed one of the complaints that someone had was that it was in French and had subtitles. I mean, come on, you can't mark a movie down for being in a different language, for God's sakes. But anyway, if you speak or understand French, you're going to be in great shape because it's a French film and they're speaking in French. If you don't speak or understand French, don't worry, they have the subtitles, but hopefully that'll be okay with you. I did think this was an interesting quote in the film. He says, "You can't explain a painting, you have to feel it." One of the things I like about this film is I do believe that it really kind of gives you a sense of what Renoir is all about in terms of an artist and what, again, his philosophy was. So I think it does a good job in that regard. These are the three main characters, so you can be on the lookout for them. That's Renoir over on the far left, and then that's his son. Again, that's his second son, Jean, on the far right. He's been off in World War I fighting, which is interesting because in 1915, the war is ravaging in Western Europe, well, in Eastern Europe as well, but particularly in Western Europe, and particularly in France. But this is kind of far removed geographically from the devastation of World War I. So Jean gets injured during the war. He comes home to convalesce. And while he's there, he meets this young lady, Andrée, who happens to be a new kind of model for his father in basically the interaction between the three of them. About 90% of the film kind of focuses on these three things, and then the relationships that the three of them have. So between Renoir and Andrée the model, there's that relationship. Then you have the relationship between Andrée and Jean, because once he comes home, he starts basically getting an interest in her and vice versa, and they end up in a romantic relationship. And then the film also discusses this kind of complex relationship that John and his father have between one another, and just kind of all the different trials and tribulations. So it's kind of almost like a soap opera to a certain degree, these relationship that these three characters have. Now, for myself, I'm not a film expert. I'm more of like knowledgeable about art. So when I was looking at the film, I was kind of approaching it in this presentation is kind of focused more on the life of Renoir, the artist, the visual artist, the father. However, the other two characters have a really important role in the history of film. Since I'm not an expert as much on the history of film, particularly French film, not going to talk as much about that. But if you are interested in that topic, this film might be educational in that regard. So it starts off with this beautiful young lady or woman, and she's riding a bike through the countryside, and she's on her way to Renoir's house. Just to kind of give you some of the context of what takes place, and this is her. She's basically interested in being a model for Renoir. So that's what she does. She's posing for him. This is a picture of him in his studio. Remember, I showed you the photos of what the studio looked like at this house. And so, it's not exactly the same, but that's not, to me, really that big of a deal. It's close enough. But sometimes people kind of get focused really on, how historically accurate is it. So if you're the kind of person that's going to really be bummed out or upset that they didn't film this in his exact studio, then I can tell you ahead of time, that's probably going to be disappointing for you. But for me, not really that big of a deal. But you can tell that just by looking at this doesn't look exactly like his home studio did. And eventually, again, she's posing for him for quite a while. Some pictures of her. And this is a true character. So this isn't like a Hollywood, even though this is a French film, this isn't a Hollywood made up thing. These people and the events that take place. So Renoir ended up doing dozens and dozens of paintings with her in them. So here's one example. Here is another one. And these are some of his most well-known works from this later period in his life. So they really ended up being a great team, the artist and the model, working together to make these great paintings from the later years of Renoir's life. a lot of people think that she really kind of gave him a spark, so to speak, inspiring him to kind of make these works. And in the film, eventually the son returns home, and you can see here he's on crutches because he was injured in the war. And he has kind of an interesting relationship with his, even without the young lady, just the relationship back and forth between Renoir and his son is an interesting one, and you can be on the lookout for that. This is a good depiction of how Renoir had people help him later on in life with his paintings because of his arthritis. And eventually he starts getting an interest in the young lady, and she gets an interest in him. And guess what happens? They fall in love. But since it's a film, there's of course trials and tribulations that I won't spoil what those are for you. I'll let you check that out yourself. And then again, there's the dynamic of her relationship with Renoir, the artist. And so again, you have this kind of complex triangle between these three characters. And again, for myself, because more of a art history type of guy, I was focused more on the Renoir side of the things. But if you like film history, you might be more interested in the two of them. Now, in the film, there's all these beautiful paintings, and there's Renoir, the character or the actor, making these beautiful paintings. And how did that come about? Well, this also has an interesting story. The director of the film, he actually hired a well-known art forger to recreate these paintings that are in the film. So basically this guy, picture over on the left, he was in jail for 3 years, and he gets out, and the director basically was looking for someone kind of like him, and hired him basically to recreate a bunch of Renoir paintings. So I mean, what perfect candidate can you have than an art forger, professional art forger that had just gotten out of jail for 3 years. So what he used to do, the art forger, was he would make paintings that looked like works by well-known artists, and then try and sell them off as, this was like a painting that was lost somehow. So he wasn't like copying a well-known work. He was trying to make it look like a famous artist and then try and sell it as being done by that. And of course, that wasn't the case. He gets caught, goes to jail, whatnot. Here's a quote: "I didn't want to use any computer recreations of the paintings. That I wanted them to be shown being created in the moment." And so when you see this work, you can see some examples in the back. That's made by the art forger guy. So kind of an interesting story. And the reason they did that was because of just like copywriting issues and whatnot with the owners of the paintings, and not having to go through all that stuff. But the guy spent several months making these reproductions of these well-known Renoir paintings, or ones that are kind of similar place. So that. And then there's several scenes where Renoir, the actor, is creating the paintings, and that's actually the art forger's hand. And so since he had been making the paintings, he knew how to paint, and he was familiar with Renoir, they basically bandaged up his hand in these scenes. Renoir's hands and wrists are bandaged because of the arthritis. But again, that's not the character, or that's not the actor playing Renoir doing the painting. It's actually the art forger guy. So he has a cameo role in the film. Well, not him totally, like just really his hand, but you get the idea of what I'm talking about. They had to put makeup and stuff to make it look like the aging that takes place. And so again, when you see these scenes, the paintings are made by the art forger, and the scenes where they're being painted are actually by the forger himself, making a cameo role. So kind of an interesting backstory with that. And here he is again. So really kind of a neat side story to the film. He talks about how when he got out of jail, his finances were pretty messed up, and he was wondering what he was going to do for a living. And then lo and behold, he gets this call out of the blue from this film director that wants to work with him. And so ended up being a pretty good deal. And here's just some more information on the film Renoir. There's the director and the actors, whatnot. The cinematographer, Mark Lee Ping Bin, he gets a lot of credit for the beautiful design of it. The cinematography got a lot of accolades. It was released in 2012. It's 111 minutes long, so a little bit short than 2 hours. Just warning, I know sometimes in these programs, we have people joining us with their children or whatnot, which is totally fine. However, this movie does have some nudity. It's not anything too crazy, but just FYI, if that's a concern to you. And then there's also some language that's a little strong, potentially, depending on what your kind of threshold is, so to speak. So I just thought I would give you a heads up on that. So what do I think of this film? I actually like it a lot. It's a true story. And for me, these historical type films, the number one kind of criteria for me personally is, does it capture the essence of what it's talking about, either the person or the event or the place? And I feel like this film does. When you watch this film, if you didn't know anything about Renoir going in or knew very little, by the end of this film, you'll kind of have an idea of what he was like. And I don't feel like it really takes a lot of liberties, so to speak, on the telling of the story. It's very visually beautiful. Again, the cinematography is spectacular, the scenery, the art, and whatnot. The clothing, the fashion designer, I think, got some accolades for the work that she did. The one criticism I would say, or maybe two criticisms, some people talk about they feel like the pace is a little slow. So just throw that out there. And then sometimes maybe the characters, the interaction between them seems kind of maybe melodramatic to a certain degree. I don't necessarily think those two things, but that was just kind of some of the feedback that I got from people that have seen this film. But the stunning cinematography is really amazing. And then again, the quote that I thought that I liked the best, the one that I kind of really thought kind of sums up the essence of Renoir's career is, quote, "A painting should be something pleasant and cheerful." Now, what about these performers or the actors that played these true characters? What happened to them? So Jean Renoir, that's him in the film on the right. That's a picture of him on the left. And if you're not familiar with film history or say French films, he's a was a very well-known, influential film director. A lot of, like I know Martin Scorsese, very influenced by him and just very talented. So anyway, but in the film, he hasn't quite fully decided he wants to be a film director. It's just something that he's kind of thinking about. Here is the young lady in the film on the left, and she actually ends up marrying Renoir's son, and she's the starring actress in the film that Jean Renoir makes. So again, this is a true story. These are actually real people that take place. Here they are in the film. And in this particular scene, they're actually watching a film, ironically enough. And then here they are in real life, actress on the left and film director on the right. They would eventually get married. I'll let the film kind of tell you the story. It does it kind of at the very end, but they did end up getting married and collaborating together, but I won't spoil the ending and let you see what happened with that. And here's an example of one of the advertisements for the film that they made together. You can see his name over on the right side. Her name as an actress, she changed. She went with a more American sounding Catherine Hessling. So you might see her name listed as different things, depending on if it's a art context like the Renoir, the Father Association, or her name as an actress. Now, I've been recording this program, and I'll put it on our YouTube page if you join us late or want to listen to it again. I'm going to stop the recording in a little bit, though, because I can't record the actual film that we're going to be showing. But just if you're interested and want to watch that again, or if you didn't get a chance to see the Renoir programs we had earlier, the ones from the Barnes, the Detroit Institute of Arts, and the Art Institute Chicago, you can check them out on our YouTube page, Washington, D.C. History and Culture. And we don't have it fully up on our calendar, but in a couple of weeks, we're going to have a program kind of sort of like this, except we're going to look at 3 Van Gogh films over 3 days in a row. So there's a lot of great films about Vincent Van Gogh, and his birthday is coming up. Vincent Van Gogh's birthday is March 30th. So I thought, in honor of Vincent's birthday, why don't we check out some Van Gogh films? So we're going to show Lust for Life with Kirk Douglas, At Eternity's Gate with William Dafoe, and Loving Vincent. It's an animated film. So if you follow us on Meetup, these events I think are posted there. If you follow us on Facebook or Eventbrite, they haven't been posted yet, but they will be in the next day or two. And then I'll also email you the information in case you want to join up for us. For these films, we have the one thing that might be a little bit tricky is there's 2 showings each day. There's one that's in kind of the afternoon in the US time for our friends over in London and Europe. And there's an evening showing. So for each film, Lust for Life is on Monday, At Attorney's Gates on Tuesday, and Loving Vincent's on Wednesday. There's 2 showings a day. If you're in the East Coast, the showings are in the afternoon and the evening. If you're in, say, London, the showings would then, I guess, be in the evening and like, I don't know, midnight or something like that. But again, if you haven't seen this already, the announcement for it, I'll email it to you because it's not, we don't have it fully posted up on all of our different sites and whatnot. But let's go watch the film. So I'm going to need a few seconds to set this up. So let's take a quick break and give me a couple minutes. If what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to stream the film. And so if you want to watch it with us, you're more than welcome to stay on. I haven't been able to keep an eye on the chat and the Q&A, but I'll do so as the film is streaming. So if you want to watch the whole entire film or part of it, feel free to do so. I'm going to stream it in just a minute. If you don't want to watch it or you have to go somewhere else, I included the links in the information that had the Zoom connection. You might have to scroll down a little ways, but you can watch it for free on Amazon with commercials, or you can watch it on YouTube if you pay like a few bucks. So I'll give you a chance to do that. But anyway, I need about maybe a minute or two to kind of cue this up. So let me stop this.